I'm tired of just gushing about them. Today I'm going to tell you about the worst parts of some of my favorite games. Starting with Ivy Studios' Mythic Mischief. This is a abstract chess-like board game in which you are going to be controlling a faction, a clique from a mythic high school, and you are going to be navigating the board, attempting to get the Tome Keeper to catch your friends and not you. It's a lovely, thinky game that I adore very much. If you're into asymmetry and if you're into abstract, this is a game that you must try out. That being said, there are some negatives. First and foremost, I've already mentioned it, the analysis paralysis in Mythic Mischief can be a lot. There are times, especially in a 4-player game, where you are sitting and waiting for the opponent to think about what to do. In fact, Doolin and I, over off screen, just purchased a chess clock strictly so we could play some 2-player games with the intention of playing them with a chess clock, and Mythic Mischief was the one that spawned that idea initially. We're gonna have some gameplays on the channel where we're playing with the chess clock, so we're unable to sit there and think for too awfully long. We think that'll be quite entertaining, and this is a game that honestly could use that because I love it dearly. It's an amazing game, but the amount of AP that can happen with certain players, with certain factions, and certain board states is just astronomically high. It's a game that I think would make a brilliant app, like a way to play asynchronously, because it's one of those things kind of like Root, where you take your full turn and then someone else goes. I find that games like that work far better asynchronously than something like Everdell, where your turn is very simple and quick. This can give you a lot of time to process what you're doing. And ultimately, Mythic Mischief does have a lot of time where you're just sitting waiting for other people to take their action. Next on the list isn't necessarily a negative, but it can be in that it's harder to introduce to people because of what I'm referring to as skill parity. And what I mean by that is just if someone is way better at the game than others, it's going to be hard to play without the other person purposefully making themselves take wrong moves or wrong actions or look silly. And that's just like chess, and that's just like other abstract games, and it's hard to really get away from that. But it is something that still comes with the game. If you are experienced and have played it a dozen times, you are going to be at a severe advantage compared to someone who is new to it. And not that that is a bad thing, because it rewards skill and practice and dedication, but it can also mean that it's harder to table with people who don't like getting blown out or don't like when you take it easy on them, because some of those just might have to happen. Next on the list is it has the possibility, I don't want to say tendency, but it has the possibility to have anticlimactic endings. And I mean that in the vein of like Spirit Island has often been referred to as having anticlimactic endings, where the game is great and then eventually you see it, and rather than it being like, oh my god, I figured it out, it's like, oh yeah, I can do it, I've won. And your opponent's just sitting there like, oh, okay, show me how. And I show you how, and it's over. And that's not how this game ends all the time. By no means do I want to insinuate that, but it does have a tendency to do that on occasion, where a game has been epic and tense the entire way, and then someone's like, oh yeah, I can do it. I can win. Yeah, you've lost. No, yeah, I'm going to get 2 here. Just like this. And it's just like, cool. But at the same time, it's kind of disappointing when you've had this tense back and forth. And then I've also had games like this, literally my first experience with this, and it wasn't the only one that's been like this, where I jumped with joy, I raised my fists in the air in the middle of the Origins Hall, I pumped my fist and I was like, yes! Like, smack dab in the center of the Origins Expo Hall. And it lends itself to that too, but not every game's gonna be like that, because some games, it's just gonna be a slow burn, and you end the game, and that's that. Then you've got the issue with storage. If you're like me and you do not have the Headmaster Pledge, you only have the Basic Pledge. And I have 3 other small boxes behind me for the expansions that do not fit here. So it's 1 big box and 3 small boxes. If you have the Headmaster Pledge, you can fit it all in the main box, and that's great. But if you don't, then the storage becomes a bit of an issue. And lastly, kind of hand in hand with storage, the components and the price are a bit much. And I say that as someone who loves deluxe stuff. I love the components in Mythic Mischief. I don't want them to be any worse. But I do see this as a negative because it's not as accessible. You're dropping $60, $70, $80 to get into Mythic Mischief, whereas with most abstracts, you're dropping, $25, $30 to get into them just because they are less pretty and less component heavy. And Mythic Mischief is just deluxeified in a lovely way, but one that makes it harder to get because it's just more expensive. So a great game that does have some negatives, that's Mythic Mischief. Now, the board game that you're probably expecting to see here, because I have gushed about it absolutely nonstop, is Dune Imperium. This game has shot up into one of my favorite games of all time. I've played it 4 times in the past 2 weeks. Those are the only 4 plays I have, so it still has a lot of proving itself to do. But as it stands, I am loving it. Loving it. However, I've got a list of negatives here. List of things that you need to consider if it'll impact you as it impacts me, which is not very much. These are negatives, but they don't impede me. They don't stop me from absolutely adoring this game. First and foremost for me is the lack of market refresh. Now, I play with a variant of the game called Sandworm Eats Cards, and basically that just means that at the end of every round, the final card in the card row gets eaten by a sandworm and a new one pops out. So basically it allows the deck, the Imperium row, to cycle without everything needing to be purchased by the active players. This isn't a huge issue, especially because it's resolved by an incredibly simple house rule or variant, but I am someone who likes to purchase a lot of cards, and I'm not saying that's the greatest strategy in Dune Imperium. In fact, it may be not good in Dune Imperium, but whatever, it's fun to see what comes out. It's fun to see the cards that show up in the market row. It's fun to purchase them and see how you can use them. And for me, I find that the base game without that variant in play, it's fine. It's good. I still love the game. The first time I played it, we did not use that variant, and I loved it. But I like it more when I'm able to see more of what the deck has to offer and what I can do with that. So I find that improves the game for me. Next is that, and I am not, let me clarify, and that I am not qualified to speak on this, and so I'm not going to sit on it for too long. But the consensus seems to be that Dune Imperium has a must-have expansion in the Rise of Ix expansion. In all 4 of my plays, I have played with Rise of Ix, which is why I don't feel qualified to speak on this, because I've never played it at just the base game, only with the expansion. But I do love it, and I do really enjoy what the expansion adds as far as the tech tiles and the new ways to utilize your Solari, or different ways to utilize your Solari, I should say. I really like it, and I worry that I wouldn't like the base game as much. And from what I hear from everyone else is that Ix is basically a must-have. Like, if you really like the game, you need to get Ix, which is great. I love that these expansions add so much and make the game so much better, but at the same time, that's just another $40, $50 you have to toss down on an expansion to an already great game, and I worry that that's a lot to pucker up, to spend to get this game. One of the biggest negatives that I see people talk about, I don't have an issue with this personally, but I can understand where it would impact you, is that you are occasionally locked out because of the way the worker placement is. This is not like a generic standard worker placement where you go wherever is open. You must have a card in hand that allows you to go to those spots. So it is very possible, especially in the early goings, if you're playing a 4-player game, for you to draw your cards, and by the time it gets around to you, because of spot requirements and cards in your hand, you can't go anywhere. I think that's an extreme example, but one that can technically happen, and because of that, I do think that gets a little ding. It's one that, you may only have a couple places you can go, and by the time your turn rolls around, you can't go there, and that can definitely hurt. Granted, that means you're revealing more cards, you're getting more purchasing power, and it definitely offsets it to an extent, but it can definitely feel bad if you are unable to go where you want to go strictly because the cards don't allow you to go there. Then, another one to think about is the fact that there is a decent bit of luck in the game using the intrigue cards. The intrigue cards do a number of different things, whether that be adding swords into combat or allowing you to retreat or just giving you free spice, but there are also ones that award you victory points, and these can swing the game in a pretty hefty way. Me personally, I like the addition of luck in my games. I have no problem with that being in there. I enjoy the fact that I am able to have some randomness involved. I like that. I don't like a game to be entirely mathematical. That said, apparently Remy does. He loves mathematical games. That said, I can see where the luck of the intrigue cards can absolutely be an issue to some, and so I want to bring that to your attention now. And that using them, there is certainly an element of luck because these cards are very powerful, and you're just drawing out of a deck, basically. Then there is some component inconsistency, and I mean that across the base game, across the expansion, and across the deluxe components even, because some of the deluxe components it was before Ix, so Ix isn't deluxified, and the base game and the expansion just kind of have differing component qualities, I guess I should say. And so overall, a very minor thing aesthetically, doesn't bother me in the slightest. I've played with Kenny, who has the deluxified components, and I've played with mine, who has the bare bones. I've never even touched it. Nothing is different about this than what you would get in the box. I still love it. But it is something to consider. And last but not least, it makes you want to drop money on better components. I mean, as someone who's loving this game, I have an Etsy cart full of spice and water and ally tokens and things that make the game look prettier. I'm not purchasing them yet because money, but I do want them. And so as a little negative, it makes you want to spend even more money, because if you're going to dig this game so much, you're going to want to bling it out probably. At least I do. And last but not least, we have the beast itself. Blood on the Clock Tower. Now, I know what you're thinking, Max. It's impossible. That game is perfect. There can't be any negatives. And though I agree with you, others may not. And I'm here to vie for them, to defend them, to be on their side for once, even if they're wrong. Of course, I'm kidding, but there are some negatives to Blood on the Clock Tower. And let's talk about that. This is a game that I absolutely adore. It is easily in my top 10, spoilers. But let's run through what I consider to be some of the problems with Blood on the Clock Tower that you may or may not be aware of or care about. First one, kind of obvious, is player count. This is a game that has a wild player count that you can play from 5 to 20, which is great. That is a positive. That said, I do think the game is going to excel at those 8+, and it's going to probably still be great above 12 to 15, but it's also going to be harder to run for the storyteller. So I find that 8 to 12, 8 to 13 is probably that sweet spot. Honestly, the closer, like maybe even 10 to 12 is probably the sweet spot. But this is a game that you need a lot of people for. And so, for better or worse, it's going to be an amazing game, but it's not going to be one that you're going to be able to table all that often because you're going to need a whole host of people to actually play it. Obviously a negative, but it's worth it, especially if you can get a committed group together that keeps playing it. Man, it has been so incredibly rewarding. I love it. One big thing about Blood on the Clock Tower that does not bother me, but I can see easily turning away people, especially if their first time is not so great, is the fact that there are hits and misses, is what I'm going to refer to that as. And what I mean by that is some games are epic, incredible storytelling experiences where you've puzzled it out and you've got tricked by the poisoner and so on and so forth, and it's amazing. Other games, the luck of the draw where you are dealt out tokens entirely randomly can sometimes end the game very quickly. One recent game we had, Doolin was the imp who was next to Danielle, who is the empath, which basically reads her neighbors. And also the fortune teller happened to pick me and Doolin right out the gate. So round one, the fortune teller learned that Doolin or I was the demon, and Danielle learned that one of her neighbors, Doolin or I, was evil. And honestly, that was just it. Granted, there could have been misinformation, 100%, but that game was over in a round because we were like, well, let's try Doolin because what's the worst that could happen? I don't remember what he was claiming, but it wasn't even that great of a roll. So it wasn't super scary like the Saint or something. And I can see instances like that. If that is your first and only play of this, where you're disappointed, where you did not have a great time, it did not pan out the way you thought, it was kind of boring, it was lackluster, and I can see if that's your only experience with this, that you might not want to come back to it again. That said, I've probably had 6 amazing experiences for every meh experience, and even the meh experiences are just like, all right, run it back, I want to play it again. I have no problem with them. Then there is the maybe bigger problem of the fact that some people might feel useless, and they might see that as the game being boring. And to clarify, I think they're wrong, but it is a valid feeling to have. There are roles in this game that are incredibly powerful. You've got the empath, the fortune teller, the imp, the poisoner, whatever. And then there are roles in this game that are inherently weaker or thought to be weaker, like so maybe the virgin or the butler or the recluse, especially those outsider roles. But even something like the cook or the weather woman who just gets information round one and then never again. They feel useless, and they feel that if your character's role was useless, then you don't have a game to play. And I find that some people occasionally will feel that because they're useless, there's nothing to do. And I very much disagree. I think that the game is far more about the puzzle and figuring things out than it is about what your ability can do. And I think that there are ways to utilize every ability to where it can be stronger. Obviously some are going to be stronger than others, no doubt about that. But I don't think that having weak roles is impossible, like, yeah, the game's going to suck if you pull the butler. You're just going to hate it. It's a bad game. But especially for people that are playing it the first time, just like that mech experience, if the first time you play it, you draw the butler, you're not having a ton of fun with your ability. And if you're not used to playing the game and figuring it out outside of your ability, then you may have a rough experience. And again, if that's your only play, I can understand entirely where that's going to appear pretty negative and like you might not want to play it again. And that is just the diversity in roles, some strong, some weak, and how some people think that if they're weak, the game is boring and they don't have anything to do. And I can absolutely see that and validate their feelings, even if I think that there's more strategy to be had past that. One thing that I do not consider a negative necessarily, but can be and can frustrate players, is the storyteller influence. So if you do not know anything about Blood on the Clock Tower, this is a social deduction game like One-Eyed Werewolf or Mafia or Town of Salem, but there also is one person who kind of acts as the dungeon master, the game master, and they're referred to as a storyteller. And ultimately, there are times, many times, where the storyteller is given a decision to make, and it is their discretion which decision to make. And most of the time, the storyteller is just going to go with what makes the game more fun and fair, and try and basically, the storyteller's job, ideally, is to get the game to the final three, where it's very interesting and tense. And sometimes they can use their powers, or their influence, I should say, to maybe push things one way or another a little too far, or have too much influence on the game, and that can frustrate people. I totally understand that. For example, one of the characters is the mayor. The mayor might be safe at night if attacked by the demon and it bounced to someone else. And that's the storyteller's discretion. If the mayor is targeted by the demon, the storyteller has multiple decisions to make. Does the demon kill the mayor? Does the demon not kill the mayor? If the demon doesn't kill the mayor, who does the demon kill? Because it bounces to someone else. It can bounce to the demon's minion. It can bounce to anyone. And that decision alone can sway the game a lot. And if people find that you as a storyteller are influencing one side more than the other, or making games unfair, then they're probably going to have a less good time playing with you. So I think it's one thing to keep in mind is to try and keep the parity and just make sure that the game is about having fun and enjoying your time together. Last but not least, one of the biggest complaints that I entirely get about Blood on the Clock Tower is its price and its availability. This is not a game that you can find on the shelves at Target. This is also not a game that costs $25 like One-Eyed Werewolf. In fact, this game costs like $145. Now, granted, the production is very good, and I am of the opinion that it is maybe not necessary, but very much beneficial to have this kind of production. Running it as a storyteller is way easier with something like this than if you were limited to cards and cardboard tokens on a piece of paper. That would be nigh impossible. So I understand the price and I understand the availability, but it is absolutely a big pill to swallow, and one that you need to understand coming in is that this is not a small investment. If you want to play Blood on the Clock Tower, maybe make sure that you have a group there ready for you, or be dedicated to finding one. I purchased this on a whim where I didn't have anyone lined up other than like Kenny. And we've been able to play pretty consistently, and we've done a great job, honestly, because I've just been so passionate about finding other people passionate about Blood on the Clock Tower so we can play. Honestly, Mythic Mischief, Dune Imperium, Blood on the Clock Tower, some of my absolute favorite games, but I needed to tell you about some of the negatives because I find myself just absolutely head over heels gushing over them lately, and I wanted to at least show you that I had some negative thoughts about them, even if I still absolutely adore them. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed the video, check out this video over in the top left corner, and we will see you next time. Oh crap, that's gonna be the right for you. Now